The message arrived on Earth during the quietest hours of the night. Inside the Global Response Center, the ancient radio crackled with static before producing sounds that made the overnight staff freeze in their tracks. It wasn't the usual chatter from space stations or colony outposts. This was different. The distress signal came from Europa 7, a frozen planet so far from Earth that most people had never heard of it. Tom Baker, the night shift operator, leaned forward in his chair as he tried to clean up the signal. His fingers moved quickly across the controls while sweat formed on his forehead. After 20 years on the job, he had never heard fear like this in an alien voice. "Please, help us." The voice broke through the static. The others, they failed. The station, overrun. Need humans. Only humans can. The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving the room in eerie silence. Within an hour, the Galactic Council's emergency chamber was filled with representatives from 50 different species. The giant circular room buzzed with worried whispers as Admiral Ross, Earth's representative, stood before them. His weathered face showed concern as he read the full report from the research station. 3 rescue missions have already failed. The Admiral's voice echoed through the chamber. The Arcturians, with their advanced battle suits. The Novarians, masters of stealth technology. Even the Meridians, with their psychic abilities. None returned. The chamber erupted in loud discussions. A tall, blue-skinned alien rose from his seat. "Why humans?" he asked, his translator struggling to convey his disbelief. "They are among the youngest species in the galaxy. Their technology is primitive compared to ours." The Admiral clicked a button, and a hologram appeared in the center of the room. It showed the research station on Europa 7, built into the side of an ice mountain. Around it, strange shapes moved in the eternal darkness. They weren't quite animals, and they weren't quite machines. They were something in between. "The station contains vital research about an ancient civilization," the Admiral continued. "But that's not why we're here. There are 12 researchers still alive in there, hiding in the depths of the station, and something out there is hunting them." He paused, letting the information sink in. "The predators on Europa 7 have evolved differently than anywhere else in the galaxy. They've merged with the remnants of ancient technology. They don't just hunt with instinct. They hunt with corrupted AI, with stolen tech, with abilities we don't understand." The hologram changed, showing recordings from the failed rescue missions. Advanced ships torn apart by creatures that seemed to melt into the machinery. Heavily armed soldiers running from shadows that moved with terrifying intelligence. The council members watched in horror as each mission ended in failure. "You ask why humans?" The Admiral's voice grew stronger. "Because we remember what it means to be prey. Because we still carry the instincts of hunters. Because while you evolved past your primitive sides, we learned to balance them with technology." The room fell silent. On the hologram, another image appeared, one that made several council members look away. It showed the latest scan of the station's surroundings. The predators had grown in number, and they had adapted. They now carried pieces of the failed rescue missions as part of their bodies. "We'll send our best," the Admiral said firmly. "Not our most advanced team, but our deadliest. People who understand that sometimes you need to think like an animal to survive. People who know when to use technology and when to abandon it." A small bird-like alien stepped forward. "The station's research. It could change everything we know about the galaxy's history. But is it worth risking more lives?" The Admiral looked at the latest transmission data. Those 12 researchers chose to stay when they could have evacuated. They found something important enough to die for. And humanity has never been good at walking away from people who need help. He turned off the hologram, and the chamber darkened. "We'll have a team ready in 24 hours. Not because we're the most advanced, or the strongest, or the smartest, but because sometimes survival doesn't need the most advanced solution. Sometimes it needs the most brutal one." As the council session ended, alerts were already going out across Earth. The deadliest rescue mission in human history was about to begin, And somewhere in the darkness of Europa 7, both predator and prey waited to see who would survive. The old military base in Alaska buzzed with activity as 4 helicopters landed in the snow. Captain Jack Stone watched them from the window of the command center, his breath fogging the glass. The base hadn't seen this much action in years, but today it would host the most important team selection in human history. Outside, 20 of Earth's deadliest operators stepped into the biting cold. They came from different backgrounds: military, survival experts, hunters, and even a few criminals who had earned pardons for their skills. Each one had been chosen for their ability to survive in the worst conditions imaginable. Jack turned away from the window as Admiral Ross entered the room. "Tell me again why we're doing this in Alaska," the Admiral said, rubbing his hands together for warmth. "Because I need to see them break," Jack replied, his voice rough from years of shouting orders in harsh conditions. "Europa 7 is twice as cold as this place. If they can't handle Alaska, they won't survive there." The tests began at midnight. While other selection programs focused on technology and combat skills, this one was different. The candidates were dropped in the wilderness with nothing but basic tools. No fancy weapons, no advanced gear, just their wits and whatever they could find. Jack watched through thermal cameras as they struggled against the cold. Some tried to use their military training, building perfect shelters that any instructor would approve of. Others went wild, acting on pure instinct. Neither approach was right. He needed people who could do both. By morning, only 10 remained in the running. Sam Wilson caught Jack's attention first. The man had survived 3 years alone in the Arctic after a plane crash. Instead of waiting for rescue, he had learned to hunt like the local predators. Now he moved through the snow like a wolf, efficient and deadly. Dr. Emma Reed surprised everyone. Most thought the xenobiologist would fail the physical tests, but she understood predators better than anyone. She didn't just survive, she turned the environment into a weapon, using her knowledge of animal behavior to stay ahead of the challenges. Marcus Black was the wild card. The tech expert had a troubled past, but his mind worked differently. While others saw the scattered pieces of old machinery as junk, he turned them into traps. Not with complex programming, but with simple mechanics that any creature could understand and fear. "These 3, Jack said, pointing to their images on the screen. "They're the ones." The Admiral looked uncertain. "Only 3. The Council expected a larger team. A larger team would be easier to track," Jack explained. "These 3, they don't just use their skills. They understand when to be human, and when to be something else, when to think, and when to react. That's what we need on Europa 7. The final test came at sunset. The remaining candidates were gathered in a dark hangar, expecting another survival challenge. Instead, they found themselves face to face with an alien. The creature was harmless, a diplomatic representative, but none of them knew that. Jack watched their reactions carefully. Some reached for weapons that weren't there. Others froze. But Sam, Emma, and Marcus did something different. They observed. They waited. They looked for signs of threat or peace. They thought like both predator and prey. "Your team," the alien spoke, its translator making the words sound metallic, "will face things that have killed the galaxy's best warriors. Why do you think you can succeed?" Marcus stepped forward first. "Because we're not the galaxy's best warriors," he said with a grim smile. "We're its best survivors." The next morning, as the selected team prepared for their mission, Jack stood before them in the briefing room. The wall behind him showed images of Europa 7 and its deadly inhabitants. "You're not going up there because you're the strongest or the most advanced," he said. "You're going because when everything else fails, when technology isn't enough, humans remember how to be dangerous." Sam cleaned his knife, a simple tool that had kept him alive in the Arctic. Emma studied the predator patterns one last time, seeing things in their movement that others had missed. Marcus worked with parts from the failed rescue missions, understanding how the creatures had turned advanced technology against its users. In 24 hours, they would leave Earth for the deadliest rescue mission in history. They carried humanity's most powerful weapons, not in their gear, but in their minds. The ability to think like civilized beings, and the wisdom to know when civilization wasn't enough. The ship hummed quietly as it cut through deep space. Inside the cramped command room, Marcus stared at the recordings of the failed rescue missions. His eyes were red from lack of sleep, but he couldn't stop watching. Each video showed the same pattern: advanced alien rescue teams dying because they trusted their technology too much. San walked in, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Marcus and settled into the chair next to him. They watched in silence as an Arcturian warrior in a 1,000,000-credit battle suit was torn apart by something that moved too fast for cameras to catch. "Third time I've watched him die," Marcus said, taking the sip of coffee. "Each time I see something new." The creature wasn't just attacking. It was learning, understanding the suit's weak points, using its own technology against it. Down in the ship's cargo bay, Emma worked with pieces of salvaged predator tissue from Europa 7. The samples were old, but they told a terrifying story. The creatures weren't just adapting to technology. They were absorbing it, making it part of themselves. Her hand shook slightly as she made notes about how the biological and mechanical parts had fused together. Captain Stone's voice crackled over the ship's speakers. "Everyone to the bridge. The Meridian survivors report just came in." They gathered around a hologram showing a badly injured alien. The Meridian's purple skin was pale, and most of its sensory tentacles were missing. Its psychic translator struggled to turn thoughts into words. "We were foolish," the survivor's message began. "We thought our mental powers would protect us, would let us control the creatures. But their minds, they're not just animal or machine. They're both. Neither. Something else. They turned our powers back on us, made us see things, made us hurt each other." Emma took notes as the survivor described how the predators moved. They didn't just walk or run. They flowed like liquid metal one moment and struck like living lightning the next. They could look like broken machinery until it was too late, could make themselves appear as rescue workers until they got close enough to strike. Most important, the survivor's voice grew weaker. They learn. Every failed rescue attempt makes them stronger. They take our weapons, our armor, our knowledge. They're building something in the station, something that calls more of them. The message ended with a warning that made even Sam's steady hands tighten on his chair. "If you go to Europa 7, do not trust anything you see. Do not trust your tools. They will use them against you. The only thing you can trust is your instincts." Later that night, as the ship passed the outer edges of known space, the team sat together in the mess hall. They weren't eating, just thinking, each in their own way preparing for what was coming. "We need rules," Sam finally said. "Things we all agree on before we land." He pulled out his old knife, the one that had kept him alive in the Arctic. "Rule 1. We keep it simple. Basic weapons, basic tools. Nothing they can turn against us." Emma nodded. "Rule 2. We stay unpredictable. These things learn patterns. The failed teams all had strict protocols. We need to be chaos." "Rule 3, Marcus added. "We remember what we are." He looked at the others. "Not soldiers, not scientists, not tech experts. We're apex predators who learn to wear clothes and use tools. Time to remember how to take them off." Captain Stone listened from the doorway. He'd led many missions, but this was different. Other teams went in trying to prove humanity's advancement. His team was going in ready to embrace their primitive side. The ship's AI announced they were halfway to Europa 7. Through the windows, they could see the frozen planet Star, a dim red dwarf that barely lit its whirls. Somewhere down there, in the perpetual twilight of that ice ball, things that had killed the galaxy's finest warriors were waiting. But they weren't just facing the galaxy's deadliest predators. They were about to prove why humans had survived their own evolution. Not because they were the strongest, or the fastest, or the smartest, but because when everything else failed, they remembered how to be wild. The landing pod shook violently as it cut through Europa 7's atmosphere. Ice particles hammered against the hull like angry fists, while wind speeds higher than any Earth hurricane pushed against them. Sam's knuckles turned white as he gripped his seat. The planet was trying to kill them before they even landed. Their pod touched down 2 miles from the research station, throwing up clouds of frozen dust. The team waited in silence, listening to the howling wind outside. Their basic sensors showed the temperature at -120 degrees. The dim red sun barely lit the frozen landscape through thick, dark clouds. "Remember," Captain Stone said as they prepared to exit, "the moment we step out there, we're not the hunters anymore. We're prey. Act like it." He checked his simple thermal jacket. No powered armor that could be hacked. No fancy tech that could be turned against them. Emma went first, her years of studying predator behavior making her movements careful and precise. She scanned the horizon, not with advanced tools, but with her eyes. The landscape was a nightmare of twisted ice formations and strange, dark shapes that might be rocks or might be something else. Marcus followed, carrying only basic tools and weapons. He'd spent the journey studying how the creatures had turned advanced technology against the previous teams. Now he watched for signs that their own simple equipment might be compromised. They moved like ancestors from Earth's past, staying low, using natural cover, communicating with hand signals instead of radio. Sam led them through the ice fields, his Arctic survival skills reading the terrain. He spotted the first signs of danger, places where the ice was too smooth, too perfect. "Stop," he whispered, holding up his hand. Ahead of them, something moved in the twilight. At first, it looked like a broken piece of machinery, perhaps debris from a failed rescue mission. Then it moved again, and they saw how wrong they were. The creature was like liquid metal mixed with flesh, its body rippling with stolen technology. Parts of an Arcturian battle suit were fused into its skin. Meridian sensor arrays grew from its back like corrupt spines. It hadn't seen them yet, but it was hunting. Stone signaled the team to spread out. They'd practiced this, moving like a wolf pack, each person watching the other's blind spots. The creature stopped, lifting what might have been its head to taste the air. Emma noticed it first. The thing wasn't just looking for them. It was scanning, using stolen tech to search for energy signatures. But they had none to find. No powered armor, no energy weapons, just simple tools and the warmth of their bodies, hidden by the natural heat-absorbing materials of their clothes. The creature moved closer, confused by their absence. It was used to prey that glowed with energy, that carried powerful weapons and shields. Instead, it found only shadows that moved like animals. Marcus watched in horrified fascination as parts of the creature shifted, trying to match patterns it had learned from previous hunts. But the humans didn't move like soldiers or scientists. They moved like predators playing at being prey. Sam saw their chance when the creature turned away. His knife, simple steel that had tasted Arctic wolf blood, came out silently. Stone nodded, understanding the plan without words. They would show these things the humans remembered older ways of killing. The attack was swift and brutal. No energy beams, no sonic weapons, just steel and strength and survival instincts passed down through millions of years of evolution. The creature tried to adapt, to use its stolen technology, but against simple weapons and unpredictable movements, it had no defense. As the creature lay dying, its body breaking down into pools of liquid metal and organic matter, Emma studied its remains. It expected a fight, she whispered. It didn't expect a hunt. Stone looked toward the research station, barely visible through the storm. More shapes moved in the darkness between them and their goal. "They've adapted to fighting soldiers," he said quietly. "Time to show them what it means to fight survivors." The team moved on, leaving no technology behind that could be absorbed. They stayed low, stayed quiet, letting the storm hide their movements. They weren't fighting with humanity's greatest achievements anymore. They were fighting with humanity's oldest skills, and they were about to remind the galaxy why humans had earned their place among the stars. The research station loomed before them like a wounded animal, half buried in ice and darkness. Its outer walls showed deep gashes where something had tried to tear its way inside. Emergency lights flickered weakly through frozen windows, creating shadows that moved in ways that made Sam's survival instincts scream danger. Marcus studied the main entrance, noting how the advanced security system had been completely destroyed, not by brute force, but with precise attacks that showed understanding of its weaknesses. They didn't just break in, he whispered. They learned how the door worked, then turned it against the station. Emma pointed to strange growths spreading across the station's walls. In the dim light, they looked almost beautiful, crystal formations that pulsed with soft light. But her trained eyes saw the truth. The predators aren't just getting in, she said. They're making the station part of themselves. Captain Stone led them to a maintenance hatch he'd spotted. Old-fashioned, mechanical, the kind of thing the creatures might ignore because it was too simple to be interesting. The team squeezed through one at a time, their breathing loud in the confined space. Inside, the station's corridors told a story of desperate survival. Barriers made from furniture and simple materials blocked some passages. Complex electronic equipment lay smashed, while basic mechanical tools were carefully preserved. The survivors had learned the hard way what technology they could trust. They found the first body in a computer room, an alien researcher surrounded by destroyed equipment. "Look at the walls," Emma whispered. The room's screens and panels had melted, flowing like liquid metal to create organic-looking shapes. The predators didn't just kill him. They absorbed everything he tried to use as a weapon. A sound echoed through the station, something between machine noise and an animal cry. The team froze, pressing themselves against walls, becoming part of the shadows. Years of instinct and training told them to ready weapons, to prepare for a fight. Instead, they stayed still, silent, remembering that sometimes survival meant not being seen at all. They found the first sign of survivors near the station's core, a message scratched into a wall with simple tools. "Stay quiet. Stay low. Trust nothing that glows." Below it, arrows pointed toward the station's deepest levels, drawn with what looked like blood. Marcus examined a nearby security panel, careful not to touch it. "The station's eye," he said. "It's not just corrupted. It's become part of them. Every camera, every sensor. They're all eyes for the predators now." They followed the blood arrows down, going deeper into the station's guts. The temperature dropped even further, but they welcomed the cold. It meant the predators would have a harder time sensing their body heat. The first survivor found them as they passed through an old storage room. A figure dropped from above, holding a sharpened piece of metal. Stone caught the attack easily, recognizing the desperation in it. "Easy," he whispered. "We're human. We're here to help." The survivor, a young alien researcher, lowered his weapon. His translator was broken, but his relief needed no translation. He led them to a sealed chamber deep in the station's maintenance level. Inside, they found 11 more survivors, huddled around simple heating units, armed with makeshift weapons. The others, the researcher managed to communicate through gestures and broken words, tried to fight with technology, died. "We survived by remembering how to hide, how to be primitive." Stone looked at the survivors' shelter with approval. They'd created a defensive position that any ancient human warrior would recognize. Simple traps, clear escape routes, nothing that could be turned against them. But the researcher wasn't finished. He pointed to their research data, stored not in computers, but scratched onto sheets of metal. The information they'd discovered was too important to risk losing to the predators. It showed something that made even Stone's experienced hands shake. The creatures hunting them weren't just some evolutionary accident. They were weapons created by the ancient civilization that once lived here. Weapons that had turned against their makers, that had learned to hunt by stealing the very technology meant to control them. And now, trapped in this frozen station with these ancient weapons, the human team realized their real mission was just beginning. They hadn't just come to rescue survivors. They'd come to face the ultimate test of what humanity did best: surviving the unsurvivable. Stone stared at the crude maps the survivors had drawn on metal sheets. They showed the creatures' hunting patterns, their nests, and most importantly, their weaknesses. After 3 months of hiding, watching, and barely surviving, the researchers had learned things about their hunters that all the advanced alien technology had missed. "They're perfect predators," Emma said, studying the drawings. "But that's their weakness. Perfect predators don't need to adapt. These things keep changing, keep absorbing technology. That means they're afraid. They're not hunting just for food. They're hunting because they're scared of being hunted." Sam smiled in the dim light, a predator's grin that would have looked at home on a wolf's face. "Then let's give them something to really fear." The station's lower levels had old maintenance tunnels, too simple for the creatures to bother corrupting. The team split up, each taking 3 survivors with them. Stone had taught them quick, silent hand signals. No words, no technology, just the basic language of the hunt. Marcus went first, setting up simple traps in the darkness. Not complex electronic snares, but old tricks that any human child who'd read adventure books would know. Tripwires made from strong cable, pits covered with weak flooring, places where the hunters would become the hunted. The creatures had grown bold after defeating so many advanced rescue teams. They'd learned to counter electronic surveillance, energy weapons, and powered armor. But they'd never faced an enemy that thought like them, that understood fear not as a weakness, but as a weapon. Sam moved through the shadows with 2 survivors, teaching them how to walk without sound, how to use the station's architecture to hide their heat signatures. The creatures had absorbed so much technology that they'd forgotten how to trust their basic senses. Every time they passed a sensor or camera, they expected it to show them their prey. Emma's group set up false trails, using their knowledge of predator behavior. They made some paths too obvious, knowing the creatures would avoid them. Other trails they marked with small signs only a hunter would recognize. Broken materials, scratched marks. Things that looked random but told a story to those who knew how to read it. The first creature fell to Sam's trap, a simple pit that dropped it into a maintenance shaft filled with liquid nitrogen. The second met Marcus's tripwire, which sent it tumbling into a room where the survivors waited with sharpened pieces of metal. No energy weapons that could be turned against them, just the basic tools that humans had used to survive for thousands of years. The creatures began to show confusion. Their stolen technology told them where their prey should be, but those places were empty. Their advanced sensors showed movements that made no sense. For the first time, they experienced what their own victims had felt: the fear of being stalked by something they couldn't understand. Stone watched from a hidden observation point as the creatures started to turn on each other. Their perfect coordination broke down as fear took hold. They'd never learned to handle failure, had never needed to adapt to being prey instead of predator. Each time one died, the others absorbed its remains, but instead of getting stronger, they grew more afraid. Emma's knowledge of predator psychology proved crucial. She helped the team set up killing grounds, areas that looked safe to the creatures' stolen technology, but were actually perfect ambush points. The humans didn't try to match the creatures' strength or speed. They used their environment, their patience, and their understanding of fear. By the time the station's artificial day cycle began, 7 of the creatures lay dead. The survivors, who had spent months hiding in terror, now moved with growing confidence. They'd learned from the humans not just how to survive, but how to fight back. The remaining creatures retreated to their nest deep in the station's corrupted core, but they weren't regrouping for another attack. For the first time since they'd been created by the ancient civilization, they were experiencing something new: the primal terror of being hunted by something they couldn't predict or understand. Stone gathered the team for the final push. The creatures had absorbed humanity's technology, had learned to counter humanity's weapons. but they were about to learn why humans had survived countless predators during their evolution. Not because they were stronger or faster, but because they remembered what it meant to be both predator and prey, and knew when to be which. Deep in the station's corrupted core, where stolen technology pulsed like infected veins along the walls, the final battle waited. The team moved silently through darkness that seemed alive, each step bringing them closer to the heart of the ancient weapons that had turned against their creators. Sam led the way, his Arctic-trained senses alert to every change in temperature, every shift in the air. Behind him, Marcus watched the walls, noting how the merged technology and organic matter grew thicker. Emma brought up the rear, reading the signs of panic in their enemies' recent movements. The creatures were no longer trying to hunt. They were trying to survive. The survivors had shown them the research data, carved desperately into metal sheets. The ancient civilization had tried to create perfect adaptable weapons, things that could absorb and use any technology they encountered. But they'd made them too perfect, too hungry for advancement. The weapons had turned on their makers, seeing them as just another source of technology to absorb. Stone stopped the team at a junction where 3 corridors met. The walls here had changed completely, transformed into something that was neither machine nor flesh. Stolen screens flickered with random images from the station's cameras. Pieces of absorbed rescue teams formed grotesque sculptures that might have been art or might have been warnings. "They're afraid," Emma whispered, reading the signs around them. "Everything they've absorbed, every piece of technology they've stolen. It's all being used to create barriers, to seal themselves away. They're not acting like predators anymore." Marcus nodded, understanding what she meant. They've learned something new, something their creators never programmed them for. They've learned how to fear. The final chamber was a nightmare of transformation. The creatures had merged with the station's core systems, creating a nest that pulsed with stolen power. The remaining predators, now only 3, had merged into something larger, more desperate. Parts of Arcturian battle suits formed an outer shell. Meridian sensor arrays twisted like broken crowns above their combined form. But Stone saw what the others saw. The way it backed away when they entered. The way its stolen sensors swept frantically back and forth. It had absorbed so much technology, had evolved so far beyond its original form, that it had forgotten something crucial. It had forgotten how to fight without technology. Sam moved first, fast and low, the way he'd learned to hunt in the Arctic dark. His simple knife found gaps between absorbed armor plates. Marcus followed, using his understanding of the technology it had stolen to predict where its attention would be, striking where its sensors were blind. Emma coordinated their movements, reading its reactions like she'd read countless predators before. The creature fought back with everything it had stolen. Energy weapons emerged from its flesh. Force fields flickered around it. Parts of its body transformed into deadly shapes made from liquid metal and stolen machines. But each time it used an advanced weapon, the team was somewhere else, fighting with simple tools that couldn't be corrupted or turned against them. Stone watched his team work together, moving like shadows through the creature's defenses. They weren't fighting with humanity's achievements. They were fighting with humanity's heritage, the skills and instincts that had kept their species alive through ice ages and long nights when they were not the strongest creatures in the dark. The end came not with an explosion or a technological miracle, but with steel and sweat and survival instincts. The creature, for all its stolen power, died like any other predator that had grown too confident, too reliant on its advantages. It died confused, unable to understand how such primitive beings had defeated it. As the combined creature fell apart, its stolen technology breaking down into pools of liquid metal and dead flesh, Stone looked at the survivors they'd come to rescue. The researchers had watched the whole fight, and in their alien faces he saw something he recognized. Respect, not for humanity's advancement, but for their willingness to remember their roots. The journey back to the surface would be long. The station's data about the ancient civilization would need to be protected, carried out on simple metal sheets rather than complex computers. but they had proved something important. In a galaxy of advanced species and amazing technology, sometimes survival didn't depend on how far you'd evolved. Sometimes it depended on remembering where you came from and what it had taken to get there. The rescue mission had succeeded not because humans were the most advanced species, but because they were the ones who remembered how to be dangerous without needing anything more than courage, instinct, and the will to survive.